Last week there were several special days on my calendar. On Monday, I had a birthday. We celebrated. On the 12th, Dietrich, our oldest grandson, had a birthday. I remember nothing about my birth, but I remember his very well. He's 17 now. Debbie is getting old. Well, a couple of happy events during the week to recall. Also a couple of sad events. On June 10th, 3 years ago, Debbie's dad went to be with the Lord. And 10 years ago, on the 13th of June, my mother went home to be with the Lord. There are memories we have. Some we celebrate, some we think about, we reflect upon. Well, today we have Father's Day. And God's plan is for there to be a mama and a daddy. Both have important roles in raising children. Last month we had a special day for mothers. Today we have a special day for fathers. One day a year is good, but honoring our parents every day is better. In fact, God commanded it. In Ephesians chapter 6, Paul gives attention to different relationships we have and how as Christians we should conduct ourselves. First is the relationship of the wife and the husband. There will be a section on the relationship between slaves and masters. Slavery was very much a part of the ancient world. But after Paul gives attention to the wives and the husbands, he turns to children and parents. And he says these words, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." In Colossians, which has some parallels to Ephesians, Paul will say similar words. And throughout Scripture, there are instructions to children and to parents. First, there are some instructions to children given. Children are told to obey their parents. Well, certainly, as children are in the home, it works best when the parents are in charge giving the instructions and children obey the instructions. We have seen the failure that occurs when children run the household. But Paul says, children, obey your parents. In fact, this may be the only place in Scripture that children are addressed specifically. But children, obey your parents. He says, in the Lord. What does that mean? Paul is writing to Christians. And so, we're probably talking about Christians who are parents and children who are Christians. I think I messed that up, but all are Christians. However, there could be the possibility that some are not. There could be non-Christian parents involved. But in the Lord, in keeping with the Lord's will. Why? For this is right. It is the right thing to do for children to obey parents. Then Paul quotes from the Old Testament, from the Ten Commandments, in fact. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. In fact, this may be the only commandment with a promise attached, specifically. We're going to turn our attention in just a moment to how we honor our parents. We are to honor father and mother, that it may go well with us, that we may live long in the land. God gave the law to Moses. It became known as the law of Moses. Over 600 commandments. These 10 commandments stand out. And one of those is honoring father and mother. And God says, if you will honor your parents, it will enable you to do well in the land. They have left Egypt after hundreds of years of slavery. They are going to enter the promised land. There will be a delay of 40 years because of their lack of faith. But if they will honor father and mother, it will make things go better for them in the future. They will live long in the land. Paul gives an instruction to fathers. Do not provoke your children to anger. As parents, we can be too lenient, but some parents are too harsh. They are overbearing. They expect too much. Sometimes the child tries to please the parents, and there's simply no way they can because of the expectation. This can discourage a child, exasperate a child, cause them to anger. Paul says, rather than doing that, bring your children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Teach them the way of God. Israel was instructed to teach their children the law, to teach them the faith, to use every opportunity to teach their children about God and His will. And as we read through the Old Testament, we find out that many times they didn't, and the results were tragic. As I said, I want to devote most of our attention to this concept of honoring father and mother. The word honor in the Greek means to count as valuable, to value, to revere. It means to treat someone in such a way as to indicate that you value them highly. And so with parents, it means we treat our parents as valuable because of their God-ordained role in our life. Paul gave two good reasons to honor our parents: that it may be well with you. The Greek word for well is a tiny one. In fact, it appears in our English word eulogy, E-U. That's when you say a good word about someone. In Paul's day, this tiny word was used to salute a person and tell them, well done, excellent. When we honor our parents, we can know that God is saying to us, well done, excellent. Another good reason to honor parents is found in the words, that you may live long on the earth. Gary Smalley and John Trent explained it this way. God promises that those who will honor their parents actually receive life. How can this be? And they observed the work of many physicians, counselors, and preachers who dealt with people's shattered lives. And sometimes a connection there was that these individuals dishonored their parents. Their strength actually drained away as a result. When people choose to hate or dishonor their parents because of anger, bitterness, or resentment, they will pay a spiritual, emotional, and physical price. When we honor our parents, we place high value on them. And God says that such an attitude will increase the quality of our life on the earth. The late Batsell Barrett Baxter wrote, no amount of church going, no amount of financial support of the church, no strict morality can substitute for honoring one's parents. One of the tragedies of our supposedly enlightened age is the way we have forgotten and neglected the parents of this society. Medical science has extended the lifespan so much that the percentage of our population past the age of 65 has continued to increase. But medical science cannot solve the human problem of the elderly who are neglected, forgotten, and ignored. And the answer to this human problem is the awakening of our consciences brought about by our relationship to Jesus Christ. The Christian is instructed, honor your father and your mother. The biblical writers get more specific in explaining what that means. Our parents care for us when we're children. When we grow up and they grow old, we are to care for them. Some older parents are actually abused by children. But for the most part, older parents are simply neglected. As a young man, I was taken a bit aback by a person in the congregation whose mother was in the nursing home. Now, I was young, way behind the ears, didn't know anything, know a little bit more now. But I was not very familiar with the concept of one's parents being put in the nursing home. I guess it was less common back then. But then I also came to realize that this particular woman whose mother was in the nursing home was visited by that daughter every day of the week. There is a situation, a very common situation, where when a person can no longer care for themselves, that they require 24-hour attention, that the nursing home provides a valuable service. It is a sad thing when parents are put there and they wait day after day for a visit from a child and it never happens. That is not honoring father and mother. How do we regard our parents when they're old? Once upon a time, this is from Grimm's fairy tales, there was a little old man. His eyes blinked and his hands trembled. When he ate, he clattered the silverware distressingly, missed his mouth with the spoon as often as not, and dribbled a bit of his food on the tablecloth. Now he lived with his married son, having nowhere else to live. And his son's wife was a modern young woman who knew that in-laws should not be tolerated in a woman's home. I can't have this, she said. It interferes with a woman's right to happiness. So she and her husband took the little old man gently but firmly by the arm and led him to the corner of the kitchen. There they set him on a stool and gave him his food, what there was of it, in an earthenware bowl. From then on, he always ate in the corner, blinking at the table with wistful eyes. One day, his hands trembled rather more than usual, and the other earthenware bowl fell and broke. The daughter-in-law said, "If you are a pig, you must eat out of a trough." So they made him a little wooden trough, and he got his meals in that. Well, these people had a 4-year-old son of whom they were very fond. One supper time, the young man noticed his boy playing intently with some bits of wood and asked what he was doing. "I'm making a trough," he said, smiling up for approval, "to feed you and Mama out of when I get big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while and didn't say anything. Then they cried a little. Then they went to the corner and took the little old man by the arm and led him back to the table. They set him in a comfortable chair and gave him his food on a plate. And from then on, nobody ever scolded when he clattered or spilled or broke things. Joy Davidman said, "If we wish our children to honor us, we must ourselves set the example of honor. Honor your parents, lest your children dishonor you. Or in other words, a society that destroys the family destroys itself." Dwight L. Moody said, "I have lived over 60 years, and I have learned one thing, if I have learned nothing else, that no man or woman who dishonors father or mother ever prospers." Another person said, "Obedience is temporary, but respect is permanent." Our society asks young people for advice and tells its older people to go out and play. We need a respect for the elderly, for our mothers and fathers. Another story, William H. Williman told of going with a caseworker to visit a woman who lived with her 2 children in a 2-room tenement apartment. The woman was in the process of moving in the few belongings of her 84-year-old mother who had just had a stroke. She was incontinent and lost her speech. "Listen," the caseworker told the woman, "you can't be moving your mother in here with you. You've got all you can handle with your 2 children and your other problems. You're going to have to feed your mother, change her diapers, wash her bed linens. Nobody expects you to do that for your mother." The woman listened politely. Then, in a low, determined voice, she said, "Well, she done all that for me when I was little, so I reckon I can do it for her now that she needs somebody." On the way back to the car, the caseworker said, "Sometimes I don't know if there's any hope for these culturally deprived people. Maybe education is the answer." This woman realized her responsibility to her mother. Z.R. Fee said, "The greatest honor that any person can do as parents is to live a consecrated Christian life of service. That will build a monument more enduring than stone." For many of us, our parents have gone to be with the Lord. But still, we must honor them today, Mother's Day, and every day. And we honor them by the way we live. On June 9th, 2002, I turned 50 years old. It was on a Sunday. It was an unusual thing that I traveled on a Sunday. After church that morning, I headed for Lawton, Oklahoma. I did so because early the next morning, my dad was going to have bypass surgery. I found out that I was the only one of his children he had told that he was going to have bypass surgery. Found out that evening. And I found out that that's what he was set on. But my younger brother had called to wish me a happy birthday. I wasn't there to answer the phone. And he very quickly picked up in talking to Debbie that something was going on. And so he found out Dad was going to have surgery the next day. My other brother and my sister did not know until the surgery was completed. Dad had his surgery. The surgery itself was a success. But complications set in. And over the next 6 weeks, almost every week, I traveled to Oklahoma to be with Dad, to chauffeur Mother. Then in July, on a Tuesday, I was at camp. Our youngest daughter owned a cell phone at that point, and so I had it, and I called to check in on Dad. And at about the time I called, they had just declared a code blue. One moment, he was very much alive, and a moment later, he was deceased. So for these last 20 plus years, there's been no Father's Day card, no call, but there are memories. For a number of weeks, every Tuesday I remembered. It's been this many weeks since he died. And I found myself saying things, doing little things, and as I did that, I said, you know, that reminds me of the way my dad said that or did that. I think I called them dadisms. Our parents do influence us. It's very important as we live that we honor them. You've heard the expression, honor to whom honor is due. Occasionally, in a club, organization, even in the church, there will be a gathering, and the purpose will be to give honor to a certain person. Honor to whom honor is due. Well, parents are certainly due our honor while they're living and after they're no longer with us. Let us honor father and mother.